Good stuff design. The original Arena Cube was really good. Any synergy is incidental. I have a kind of pithy statement about that, which is I don't believe in magic. I think a lot of people want things to happen in a kind of naturalistic emergent sense. Like if I put all these things together, some unexpected result is going to happen. That can happen, but likely won't. And you will have more success with a focused, not necessarily endpoint in mind, but with the willingness to take control of the situation. So, in any creative endeavor, every decision you make makes it better. That's a really big blanket statement, but I think it's pretty true. So, you want to control as many elements of your creation as possible. You can't control everything, but you want to minimize accidents. You want to, but there's a corollary to that, which is you have to be willing for chaos to happen. And so, like, if something happens that you didn't intend to create, that's fine, but then understand what that is and then intentionally do that thing. One time, does anyone know what Finale is? Finale is a music writing software. And I was like messing around writing a piece back when I was in music school a million years ago. And I copy and pasted a line and it accidentally copied on like the bass clef below what I was writing at the time. And it just was like really sick what it sounded like. I certainly didn't intend to do that, but it was really cool. And then I could intentionally do that from that point on, right? I can't just like intentionally copy and paste, but you can if you want to. But the thing about this kind of raw chaotic improvisation is that so much of it doesn't lead anywhere. As we listen to jazz music, right? Let me tell you a truth about jazz music. Any jazz players in the chat? Jazz is a dirty lie. But most people believe it because they want to believe it. Because they want to believe in the magic of improvisation. So, I'm not saying these guys aren't incredibly talented. But what I mean is that these players are playing licks or melodic passages that they've played 100 times before. More than that. They've played them thousands and thousands of times. And what they're doing is they consider these melodic passages more or less the same way we use words, and they string them together in ways that I can create a sentence now. But I'm not making any of these words up, nor am I really like creating a new syntax I'm just mixing and matching. Is there a chaos-oriented cube? Here's one thing I thought about the other day. If you want to have chaotic environments, you have to take agency away from players, which is very alienating to a lot of people. But you can make it fun. And you could call it the Juggernaut Cube. Come on, we want the goods. The revised Juggernaut, that's what I grew up with. So just put a bunch of cards in the cube that just say, I'm going to do this. And largely it's going to be attacking, right? So like, must attack a Fable, must block a Fable. At the beginning of your upkeep, both players draw a card, Kami the False Moon, or Kami the Crescent Moon. Just a bunch of stuff like this that that people can't play the game without creating wild things. You don't want things like Grip of Chaos, but you don't want this. Like, this is funny, but this is more of an art piece than it is a magic card. But it's like if you have essentially a bunch of pre-programmed bot cards like this, then players can reasonably think down the line, like, okay, well, if I play this now and then I play this in 2 turns, then I can construct this kind of, yeah, just stuff like that, right? They don't make these kind of cards that much anymore. But I think you want to make sure that players have the option to cast the spell or not cast the spell, right? And so, like, um, unexpected interactions, that's my jam, man. Whoa, no, don't shut down. Okay. The truth is that, kind of like the soloist that we're listening to right now, if you build the cube, nothing's really going to be that unexpected to you. It's going to be unexpected to the player, who, again, in the music analogy, the audience is the player. The audience is the recipient of the piece of art. I'm not saying I know every interaction in this cube, because there's tons of them. But I spent a lot of time thinking about, well, if I have this card and this card, what if I add this card? And can I justify this, and how do I justify it? Like this larder zombie here, the reason it's in the cube is a lot of reasons, but like one of the things it can do is if you have larder zombie and you have Unctus and you have Nader Kraken, and then you have, like, you draw a card, make a tentacle with Nader Kraken, you use larder zombie, the Kraken, the tentacle token, Unctus, and then surveil one, and then this guy says you loot whenever a blue creature taps, and then the Nader Kraken triggers 3 times and makes 3 more blue tokens, and then you trap those 3 things, and then surveil and draw 3 cards and loot, and then you can just spend all your mana and loot through your whole deck. Well, that's something I thought of before adding this into the cube, you know, and ideally you know most of the interactions in your cube. It's just that players might not pick up on them, and it might take a long time for players to pick up on them. If you want, and again, it comes back to, like, I don't believe in magic. Things that are frequently chaotic. Oh, let me play this. Let me do this, okay? Good musical example. This is a piece called Structure for 2 Pianos. This piece is like 25 minutes long, so I'm not going to play any, I'll keep it on the background, but this piece sounds very chaotic and very quote-unquote random. It is extremely systematically composed, and like this very lattice work kind of way, where the rhythm is extremely structured, and the notes are, like, the melody is, there's no real traditional melody, but the melody is highly composed, and the harmony, everything is like mathematically mapped out. But it doesn't really sound that way to the listener, right? And so there's like there's a disconnect between the observer and the creator, and that the observer needs to know the structure in order to understand the structure, but likely won't, especially at the first time they hear it or experience the piece of art, like, they won't know the structure. But because the structure is there regardless of their knowledge, it will be effective. It will just seem random to the observer, but because it's structured, it will be powerful. And what's interesting, this is by Pierre Boulez, who's a French composer. He died maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10, I don't know. But this is written around 1950. There's another man named John Cage, and John Cage wrote music for rolling dice. He wrote random music, and then he made a system that was like, I'm going to assign these notes to these dice values, and then I'm going to roll dice, and I'm going to write music. That's what I'm going to do. And he did that, and he wrote some piano pieces, and then he heard this piece by Pierre Boulez that's on right now, which is highly ordered, and he was familiar with Boulez and his work and his method. And he wrote him a letter, and he said, it's really interesting that my random music sounds a lot like your structured music. And it really offended Boulez, but he's not too wrong, right? Like, this does sound pretty random. But the thing with the John Cage's music is, even though it's random, you could hypothetically parse out the random structure that defines it. Because there was a finite number of possibilities of those dice rolls. And while it's an endless, unpredictable series of them, you could figure out what the bounds of that series is. So, all of this is to say that chaos is frequently something that the observer experiences, but that is not true of the object. If you think about nature, right? A lot of nature seems chaotic to us, but nature is by default governed by physical laws. Now, on a very microscopic level, we could talk about random actions and things like that. But as far as like, human level Newtonian physics and things like that, there's not a lot of random things going on. Like, it's mostly just a large chain of events. It's not exactly predictable because it's so complicated, but it is structured by nature. Structured by nature. So what I'm saying is that if you want to create a chaotic environment, you have to accept that it won't be chaotic to you. But it can seem chaotic to the players. And the fun thing about chaos is that it puts you in the moment, right? Like because you cannot predict what's going to happen, and then you have to be observant of your surroundings and try to make the best sense you can of the options you have available to you. And so that sounds like draft to me, right? So that's what I think is so appealing about Chaos Draft, is that it seems like the ultimate draft format. But, there are stupid statements you could say, like every draft format is full of magic cards, right? So that by default is true. The draftiest format, Weatherlight, it's about a flying boat. Draft. What is there a set with wings in the name? You also want to make sure that your cube and game, whatever you're making, is enjoyable, right? And so there are bounds to that. And that helps, that's going to reduce the amount of chaos as well. Magic has mathematical rules that govern it. The mana curve is very important. You can't just have a bunch of 7-drops in the cube, But unexpected interactions. So how do you maximize unexpected interactions? This whole cube is about maximizing unexpected interactions. The way you do it, here's the shortcut. Each card needs to do 3 things. Or 3 elements of a card need to be important. 3 that's a lot to ask. You'll be lucky if you find a lot with 2, but you really want the number of cards to do 3 things. The cards that you don't want to do 3 things are your payoffs, right? So or your interaction. You don't need source flashers to do 3 things. But as far as your threats or your card advantage engines, which are your basic components of a keyword, threats, card advantage engines, and interaction, then your threats and card advantage engines need to have a multiplicity of uses. So you can look at just the anatomy of a card, right? Like the type, the color, mana cost, effect, power toughness. You need to set up a system in which 3 of those things matter. It doesn't matter which ones. So let's say you have a whole thing about cards that cost 2 or less. I don't know what that would be. But then all of a sudden this becomes important. And so there's a differentiating factor between 2 and 3 mana cards, other than the natural curve, right? Well, let's say you have type matter is very common, right? So you have artifact matters, and then you can do that. But if you want to avoid these kind of blob synergy cubes, another important thing is to make sure that a lot of your synergy pieces or things that can be used in a variety of ways are creatures, because they're the most reliable and bare bones element of Magic. They provide persistent advantage. They don't take mana to use. They can attack and block. They will always be relevant in a game of limited. And so you need to have your cards that are and they're also the most common card type in your deck. So you need to have creatures be, have your synergy pieces be creatures. And that's where Magic has changed so much in the last couple of years, because those cards didn't used to exist. But now with sets like Modern Horizons and Neon Dynasty and even Theros, even older Theros, right? Now you have creatures that are other things, or other things that are creatures. And so that's why when we go back to talking about in the Jund Cube that we were looking at from Tyler, then you could say one way to make spells matter is to make spells make... What's going on? So close. So close. Whoa. That's what happens if you can see view. Well, I can pull up my Storm Cube here. One way to make spells matter is to make spells creatures. You really can't avoid the core engine of Magic, which is, especially limited, which is creatures attacking and blocking. But I will say, like, unexpected interactions take the most work to put together. It also requires you, of course, it's still up there. Okay. So if we want Spellslinger to work, the Spellslinger deck still needs creatures. If you look at Strixhaven, the way they solve this is the summoning spells. And so all the learned spells by default create creatures, because you could have Inkling Summoning or Elemental Summoning or so on. You know. Again, it can be very informative to look at draft sets and figure out how did they solve the same problems that you might have. Because most of the problems you can run into, they've run into before. Unless you're doing something really bizarre.